Hi all, let's have an amazing aesthetic experience by having a look at the sacrifices of Alexey Shirov. Alexey Shirov is a Soviet-born Latvian chess grandmaster, so that's the same place as Mikhail Tal. As such, he actually studied Mikhail Tal in his youth, and his playing style has been influenced by Mikhail Tal. He's been consistently ranked among the world's top players since the 1990s. And reached the ranking as high as number 4 in 1998. He is a well-regarded chess author. I have one of his books, Fire on Board, and often he's referred to as Fire on Board for the amazing complications and drama that he creates on the chessboard. He was also a student of the Botvinnik School of Chess, who had graduates including Karpov, Kasparov and Kramnik. Okay, let's have a look. The first example sacrifice of 10 that I'd like to show you is against Veselin Topalov, and this dumbfounds my Houdini up to a massive depth. It's only when you actually put what black played. Let's see though what happened in this position. King G1, and here black to play. Shirov plays a remarkable move, and this has been covered in depth in a specific video for this game on the channel, which I might put a link to in the description. For here, I wonder if you can guess a completely outrageous move which changes something fundamental about the position. Because if white's allowed to, white can set up a blockade, and the two extra pawns might not mean anything in this opposite coloured bishop ending. So you have to be wary about this. That's a slight clue. You have to actually do something quite radical here. So if I give you 10 seconds here, you might want to pause the video and think of an amazingly outrageous move which might do something positive. I think you really need to transcend calculating variations here and bring imagination to the fore. So 10 seconds starting from now. What would you play? Okay, Shirov plays bishop h3. What is this? What on earth is this, you might ask? Why is the bishop being given up? Well, it is quite remarkable. If white doesn't take the bishop, and there is a detailed video on this, black can actually carry on with king f5, still offering the bishop. And this is going to sort of potentially transpose. So let's just examine the more simple. Just take the bishop. What happened? King f5. The king is aggressively coming in. Well, note that this f pawn is freer, and the f3 square, because of that pawn being uprooted here, means this f pawn is more significant, and it's not really giving a great structure for these white pawns either to be able to create a pass pawn. The pass pawn potential for white has been dented, whilst this pass pawn has kind of been liberated. And you might wonder as well, why is Shirov just also given up f6, the observer might notice? Well, the idea is that this pawn isn't even needed now. The king has to be aggressive in this endgame, nothing else will do. The king wants to be able to herd the d pawn. So white takes that, and now d4. So the problem is the bishop has got this outside passed a pawn to also deal with, as well as the king coming in. Bishop e7 was played. I think that's an emergency against a3. If king e2, a3 here is really difficult to parry. The bishop's kind of been blocked here, and it can't do anything here about this a pawn. So I think this is looks pretty much forced in this position to either play bishop e7 or try sacking a pawn. A bit radical. Bishop e7 was played, and now king d3. This king is very, very aggressive. So these pawns are just handled by this pawn, and this bishop has to handle these two pawns. It's actually technically lost here. Bishop c5, king c4, a very, very good move, gaining a tempo, an important tempo on the bishop, unblocking the pawn. White tries bishop e7. And now here, king b3 was played. King b3. And yes, this is the final move where Veselin Topalov resigned. So why did he resign here? Well, let's see. I mean, if he plays bishop c5, d3 is strong enough to win here. If king e3, for example, king c2, if bishop b4, we just deflect the bishop away with a3. The bishop cannot cope with the king here and these two pawns. It's just unbearable. It's a lost position. So Topalov had to resign. So this is considered one of the most startling moves, one of the most brilliant moves of all time, in fact, bishop h3. It's an amazing concept for this endgame, to get a really aggressive king and even give up f6 after. So there's two sacrifices, a bishop and the f pawn, and the king is showing great aggression and the bishop is showing that it's overloadable here. Now let's go to another game. Shirov was playing white against Lipinski in the Daugavpils 1990 tournament, and he plays in a very romantic style. So I'm actually going to show you this game from the very start, which is unusual for this series. He actually plays the King's Gambit. After knight f3, g5, he plays bishop c4, and black now plays g4, and Shirov simply plays in the romantic era style. He just castles. So what can a 2700 strength player do with this romantic opening? Let's see. I think this is called, this is the Museo Gambit of the King Gambit accepted, sacrificing the knight. So black's structure is damaged. The f file is very dangerous for black's king safety. Queen f6, and now we see e5. After queen takes e5, Shirov plays in true romantic style. Bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, and now d4. So the f file is really under fire. Queen takes d4, and now white uses that pin on the f pawn with bishop e3. Queen f6, the queen tries to stay next to her king. Bishop takes f4. And we see in this position move king e8, knight c3. The knight is making an entrance here, potentially with knight d5. Also, of course, rook a1 check is dangerous. Knight c6, knight d5, queen g6, and Shirov finishes this position beautifully. Rook ae1 check, bishop e7, and now what does white play here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, what would you play in this position? Okay, Shirov's move is one of the very strongest. There's also bishop g5 apparently. Bishop d6 though, bishop d6. And I wonder if you can spot the threats here. Do you know what white is threatening in this position with bishop d6? What's the major principal threat? I'll tell you. The bishop's pinned. It's illusory then. A pin piece, the power of it is illusory. Queen f8 is actually undefended here. And it's backed up by the rook. Queen f8, mate, is threatened. Black tried king d8, but now, guess what? Queen f8 check anyway is played. Bishop takes c7 was the same outcome as well. Still a mate in two here with either bishop takes c7 or queen f8. So queen f8 check, bishop takes, and now just the mate in one, bishop takes c7. The rook is covering e8. A beautifully played King's Gambit. Wonderful stuff. Now let's go to a very, very high profile tournament, which was like the Wimbledon of tennis but for chess, the Linares series of tournaments. Now Vladimir Kramnik is playing against Shirov in Linares 1994. We'll flip the board here. So Shirov playing black has allowed this queenside squeeze, and white now plays g3, and a normal move here I don't think does very well. Bishop b8 does seem to trap one's own rook here, and white is actually technically better now after h4, safeguarding that pawn. If queen h3, bishop g2, and white would be laughing here. This is a very, very pleasant position indeed for white. But no, okay, the positional plans are slightly ruined in this position. Bishop g5, by the way, is even worse. I think h4, well, it forces bishop to be sacked. But Shirov finds a way of doing something creative here instead of bishop b8. Can you guess what black played? Okay, queen takes h3. Actually, to be honest, bishop g5 is kind of given as another way of sacking the bishop, allowing that h4 for bishop h4. But this is another clear-cut way of giving up the bishop. So bishop g2 now, queen h5, and now the bishop is taken. So where is the compensation? Theoretically, if Shirov was playing against a chess computer, he'd probably lose this position. The computer would find amazing defensive resources. It is technically better for white here, but not by a great deal, it has to be said. Even depth 22, only by 1 unit, 1 pawn unit. Knight g4, so threatening mate in 1, so the rook moves to d1. That's a very, very good square for the rook, because actually there's a potential rook left to try and evict the queen. Rook a e8 is played, and now rook d3, as though the queen's going to be evicted. What does black do? And this is quite incredible, really. Position, check, king f1. Now the normal thing, you might think, a normal chess player will consider just taking the pawn here and hoping for the best after that. Actually, that is the engine suggestion as well, just to take the pawn on f4. White is still technically better. Black would be threatening things like knight e3 check as well. It seems quite lucrative to do this. Or even rook e3 looks dangerous. But white has defensive resources here. Queen d2 safeguarding the e3 square. And technically white should be okay here. Shirov didn't take the pawn on f4. And he plays f5. And now the pawn is actually protected, allowed to be protected with queen d2. So Shirov is not really keen on picking off the opponent's double pawns. But isn't there a slight snag here? Surely there's a slight snag that not removing that pawn, the queen is liable to be trapped now with rook h3. And this game, this next move rather, is highly remarkable. It's unbelievable, I think, in some respects, to even consider a conception like this. I think there's a slight glimpse of a pin which Shirov must have imagined here for this next move. Can you guess what he played? So it looks as though white is threatening to trap the queen with rook h3. So how would you address this? Would you try getting the queen out with queen h4? I'll give you 10 seconds here to see if you can find Shirov's move in this position, starting from now. Okay, it's the dazzling rook f6. It's amazing. Now, if white had played rook h3 and he didn't even bother, then rook g6 is a very interesting defensive resource. Technically, though, white should have gone in for this. This is actually okay for white, as long as white doesn't take the queen, because then check, the king has to go to g1, then check, and black would be better. After taking the queen here, black's the exchange up. Winning position. But in this position, actually, ignoring the queen is actually rook g3, from an engine perspective, and it might be on the unsound side, like queen h4, rook e1, and now white might be consolidating his advantage. but Shirov is playing a human being, and Kramnik actually instead played f3, which looks like a good idea as well. Normally, one would think, where's the knight going? Now, as well as not moving the knight, we see another startling move, trying to break down white's king safety here. Can you guess what black played here? Another amazing looking move, to be honest. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, and we really do have a lot of fire on the board in this position after this next move. Okay, yeah, rook e4. So the f pawn is being attacked again, potentially just to take here. That would be nice, but why can't the rook be taken? Well, if the rook's taken, we do help liberate this rook on f6. So f takes e4, knight e2. Because if the rook moved here, I think this is now crushing with rook takes f4, then taking here. This is crushing. This would be all over. White would have to give up the queen. So it's a good idea not to do that. So instead, white ignores that and plays a very good move actually. Knight takes d5, which engines like. So Kramnik is not going to be hacked that easily. C takes d5, and now Kramnik's trying to exploit his passed pawns over here. What's the point in having these advanced pawns if they're not going to be used? He plays c6. Now, if the rook takes c6, then actually we can take here. There's time to do this, and rook h3, and even win the queen. So not a good idea to play rook takes c6. Black plays now rook takes f4, and this does look very dangerous after c takes b7. So white is threatening now, queening. Rook e4 helps the queen defend b8, rook c1, and now this check is a bit annoying to queen, so king h7 gets out of the way of that. Now here you might think, well, is rook c8 possible here? You might think rook c8. It is actually. Queen g3 looks quite dangerous, trying to discourage this, but there is a move available for white in this position. Or rather, we're transposing into the game actually, potentially, because b8 here, check. We've got check here, check, and I think it's perpetual check time, like this. It's perpetual check time. So that would be saving black. So Shirov kind of actually played a different move here to rook c8. He actually queened here, dragging the queen forcibly back to b8. So queen takes b8, and now white takes the knight. Still, white technically is better. The queen goes back, but now there's another pawn over here waiting to do the same thing. What's going on here? Rook f3. This might not have been the most accurate move in this position actually. The engine suggests actually bishop f3 might actually be more accurate attacking the queen. Might end up a little bit better. So anyway, rook f3, and we see rook takes g4, and black actually has this idea of trebling the pressure in effect on g2. b7, now the pressure is trebled on g2, and black is actually better here. Actually, b7 in this position was a bad mistake, it seems. A way of staying in this game with a technical advantage would have been rook c to c3 here. Apparently now the engines indicate this might be a draw, this position here, because the queen takes g2, rook takes g2, and this might actually be a draw on the cards. After g5, black is threatening g4 check, and this is okay. This position after h2 apparently is about okay. It should be about equal. Hair raising stuff. So anyway, in the game we saw b7, and now black for the first time in a long while is actually better. This is at move 39, so maybe approaching that first time control. I assume Vladimir Kramnik might have been very short on time. Rook fg6 is played, and after rook c2, Shirov cheekily manages to get behind this pawn with rook takes g2, winning the queen for the two rooks. Check, and now gets behind the pawn, and black's doing very well. White actually resigned here. And let's have a look. If rook takes f5, if he had played rook takes f5, actually that's check, so that's not possible. If rook g3, we just take this. It doesn't matter about the king and pawn ending. That's winning for black. So after queen b1, Vladimir Kramnik resigned. It might not have been the most sound game in the world, and it seemed as though Shirov had been done over on the queen side earlier in this game. But it's amazing that he finds ways to create the complications here. I guess in the style of Mikhail Tal, you have to say. So queen takes h3, it sets dangerous problems for white. So let's now go to Paris in France in 1990. Shirov was white. This came actually from a Banco Gambit, the b6 counter Gambit line, which I quite like. And Shirov plays this very aggressively from this position with f5, trying to damage that diagonal further. h6. And white actually is doing very well in this position. But how does Shirov treat this position? When he plays e5, which gives him that e4 square, which could be handy. D takes e5, and now white to play. Can you guess what he played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, f takes g6. A very dangerous pawn on g6, but he's offering the knight, hg, bishop takes g5. You might wonder, well, what about knight takes g6 here? Well, the f6 knight is hanging here, so this is better for white. So black actually, protects f6, and we see queen f3, and that hits. It seems to hit the rook, but the actual major threat is actually queen h3, trying to mate black. There's also, e6 is on. So queen h3 is one of the major threats, or knight e4 trying to blast through. It's not actually taking the rook here, because there's always, I think, bishop b7 anyway, trapping the queen. So the major attacking threats, queen h3, knight e4, or even rook ad1, these are all to do with the f file, or e6, or the h file. So this pawn on g6 looks to be a goal-hanging pawn, ready to score a goal against black's king, but it needs some support. So Shirov is trying to give that pawn some support. Rook ad1, putting pressure on these crucial points of protection. Queen b7, and now queen h3 hits both e6 and eyes h7, and white is threatening bishop takes e6, among other things. Queen c6 protecting e6. And now a wonderful move indeed in this position is played. Can you guess what white plays here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Actually, there are very strong moves available here, to be fair. It's a strong attacking position, so you'd expect a number of solutions to be available. But knight d5 is a nice aesthetic solution. Might not be the soundest, but it's still good enough for, for a very good advantage, even from an engine perspective. E takes d. Rook takes d5. So the knight dare not take because of this queen h7. Now if knight takes, we've got queen h7 mate. So now this horrible discovered check is threatened, among other things. King f8. Now the queen goes into h7. So what is the threat, you might ask? Well, if this rook moves somewhere, then it looks as though queen g8 pretty scary. Also, bishop h6 is another threat. Black tries rook e6, bishop h6. Now, what to do about this bishop? Black tries to make a run for it. Queen takes g7, knight takes d5, trying to keep some material from all this. Check. But now, g7, this pawn is also potential queener now that the king's fleed. And also the bishop's just been offered here. Rook takes h6. But Shirov finds a way to accelerate the passed pawn. Can you guess what white plays here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay. Rook f7. Also, by the way, queen f8 was strong as well, if you said queen f8. But this is one way. King takes f7. g8 queen with check. Queen d8 check, and here black resigned. He's losing his rook on h6 to start off with. So if he played on, queen takes h6 check. King, it's hopeless. It's actually a mate in 2 here. A really crushing game, really aggressively played from this very good attacking position. It looks a bit like the Grand Prix attack system against the Sicilian defence as well, a little bit. Now let's go to another game. Boris Gelfand against Alexey Shirov, and here we see a2 being played. Boris Gelfand played what looks to be a good idea to try and create a dangerous threat against f6. So, okay. Black's actually, believe it or not, he's got fantastic resources. Black has fantastic resources available in this position. If you can spot one of the 2 main ones, that would be amazing. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, what would you play with black here against Boris Gelfand? So this is Odessa, Ukraine, 2007. Black to play. Stunning move, actually. But there's 2 stunning moves. There's a computer one as well, which wasn't played. I'll show you Shirov's first. It was queen f4 check. What a stunner. If rook takes f4, f takes g5 is mate. If g takes, the other point is bishop f2 check forces queen g3. Now we can just take here and queen our pawn. Or even cheekily take a bit more time, even more accurate is fg, allowing this check, and white's not doing anything about this pawn even here. But there's another one which the computers like in this position, even it's also quite amazing. Just to actually queen the pawn here, believe it or not. There's an X-ray defense at work here. It looks as though rook f6, but the X-ray defense, you'll notice on this diagonal, means that queen takes f6 is possible. There's no problem here. We're going to take that queen, or we're going to take on f6 with our newly promoted queen. So a1, and you might think, well, is the king exposed? Queen b3. There's actually a neat defense. Queen a to a2, defending g8 with another X-ray defense. and black would be trivially winning this. So that was quite a crusher as well, a1. But in the game we saw queen f4, and the game actually carried on for a little bit after check, taking. The more accurate move fg, as I mentioned, is good, but a1 was played here, and Boris played on a little bit. We have the game continuation like this. Now queening another, and it's pretty trivial now. White resigned here. So amazing stuff. Now let's go to Linares of 2004 for our next amazing example. Shirov was playing white here. He had already sacked the exchange. So he's got two dangerous looking pawns at the moment. Can you guess what he played in this position if I give you 10 seconds starting from now, or you might want to pause the video? This is against Timur Rajabov. So Linares, the 21st Linares edition of 2004. Okay, bishop takes, sorry, pardon me, black played queen e7. I might have given you a slight clue. Oh dear, I apologise for that. In this position, mind you, I think here it might have been a threat anyway. So anyway, so bishop takes h6 check, so it wasn't properly parried, it still existed. King takes h6, and there's an amazing point here which is kind of invisible, to be honest, in the position. I think it requires amazing calculation to see how this particular position it is quite dangerous, because you might think, isn't this a blunder? If we play the check, surely black's going to just take the pawn on g6, and then what? Queen h4 was played, and we just see, you know, not king g7 going into a mate in one. No, the king just munches that pawn. So what is there in this position for white? It's funny that the queen actually has introduced other possibilities by getting out of the way of the bishop on f3. So can you see what white played in this position, which guarantees white an advantage? If I give you 10 seconds here, starting from now. Okay, bishop takes c6. It actually damages black's control of e5. After bishop takes c6, rook takes e6 is certainly a very, very interesting defensive possibility to explore. In the game we saw b takes c6, and this now allows a key idea of taking on c6 was to weaken e5, and now rook e5 actually threatens a mate in one with rook g5. Here, black gave up the queen. Queen takes e6. And the game continued with rook takes, check. And there's still quite a lot of moves to this game, in this endgame. Essentially, white got the pawns rolling here on the king side. The queen was too much for the two rooks, eventually. So the pawns just started rolling here. I think the main point of interest was that sacrifice. So here, after queen h1 at move 66, actually black resigned. If king g8, there's a forced mate here with queen d5, queen e5, and whatever black does, he's getting mated. If check, rook d8, we have f7 check, mate in 9, g6, check. Oh, we're taking the rook. It's trivially won from this position anyway. So I think the main point of interest I wanted to show you was the initial bishop sack, But even more startling, the idea that the e5 square and switching a rook cliff like this using the 5th rank after bishop takes c6 is amazing. Something to investigate though is definitely just rook takes e6 here, because this ending here might not be anything special for white. It's about equal. It's given us dead zero actually, this position here. So that's definitely a defensive possibility which might have been more interesting for black to have considered. Now let's go to Switzerland against Gatakamsky, who's also lurking around the same current ranking as Alexey Shirov at the time of this video, and a very, very sharp variation of Slav earlier in this game. Shirov playing black. I'll flip the board. What's going on here, you might ask? Isn't d5 a bit vulnerable? Shirov tries to damage white's king safety with white's just played knight a3. This knight has to be protected or something. It is actually threatened, so the knight drops back, and we see now Shirov playing c3. Bishop takes d5. Knight takes b2. And this is not actually a material sacrifice. I just think it's a bit hair-raising what black does. It's kind of sacrificing the apparent safety of his king totally with knight takes b2. Because now white plays queen at f5, threatening this mate. Rook f6 with tempo, parrying the mate threat. Queen h7. And in this position, do we really want this check? It just seems too terrifying to be potentially walking into two glaring rooks over here in the centre. Black to play. Can you guess what black played? If I give you 10 seconds here. Okay, actually it is quite a good position even with bishop takes d5. Black played queen takes a3. Shirov sacrificed the visual safety, if we call it a sacrifice, of his king in an impressive manner after check, king e7. Rook h e1 check. Black to play in this position. What would you play with black here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. There aren't too many possibilities. Now if rook e6, I think white crashes through, rook takes e6, queen g7, and it's more than a visual problem with the king safety, it's a practical problem because we're going to lose b7. That's horrible. And then we're going to lose the queen, potentially. We're going to lose the queen. So, no, it's not rook e6. It was actually king d7. And not also king d6, by the way, because queen takes f6. But king d7, and apparently, technically, this is okay for black, believe it or not, because Shirov has got this discovered check. Every time this is used, there's a discovered check delaying white. If this discovered check is used, this discovered check will be used. We see now white playing queen h3 check, and this is another scary position. And what does black play here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, I think you can safely say, even though no material sacrifice in this game yet, it's just a visual king safety sacrifice that has been paid up here. Especially with this next move, I've got to say. So black to play, what would you play in this position? He just plays king d6. Wow! On the dark squares, away from the light square issues, because if bishop takes b7, check. We've got knight takes d1, check. And this would be good for black. If king c7, this is the disaster of the check here. Then rook takes b7. And then we can just take the queen. So king d6 is actually a winning move here. The game continued. Bishop takes b7, check. Knight takes d1, check. King takes. Now queen takes a2, threatening mate in 1. Queen g2. Check. And white resigned. Kamsky resigned here. If he plays king e2, then either rook e8 or rook e6 check is strong. Because e1's dropping off, we just take on e1, winning with a winning position. White's going to get mated very shortly. Okay, so maybe not. Okay, the most dramatic sacrifice is just offering basically d5 at the moment, but in turn for b2, not much of a sacrifice. More of a visual safety concern with king safety. How the king just stepped into the gaze of two rooks here, but it was justified because of this discovery check mechanism that facilitates the stunner coming up here that we see of king d6. How often does a king come up the board like this and get away with it? It's just this particular position. It's backfireable for white, the discovered checks. Now let's go on to another fantastic example. Vladimir Kramnik against Shirov in the candidates match of 1998, which Shirov actually beat Vladimir Kramnik, and I don't know if you're all aware of this, was entitled for a match basically against Kasparov, and it was the financial side which let down negotiations for a World Championship match with Garry Kasparov. Instead, Kramnik ended up playing Garry Kasparov in the Brain Games match in London, which I went to see a few of the games of. But Shirov had actually beaten Kramnik in the 1998 candidates match, and this is one of the more dramatic games where Vladimir Kramnik had just played knight d5, and there's an absolutely brilliant move conception played here by Shirov. Despite this pressure on f6, what does black do? He plays e4. It might seem quite natural to try and do this, but this does need amazing calculation, because after knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, d7, this is a real pain under ordinary moves here. What does black do here? Can you see what Alexey Shirov played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, and I think this is one of the only moves to give black an advantage, a significant advantage. So playing against a fellow Botvinnik school student, Vladimir Kramnik, he actually played queen b6, offering the rook. If the rook had dared move with, say, rook e6, then bishop takes f6, and what does black do? If queen takes, white just queens this pawn with a big advantage. So this is really nasty stuff. What else does black do? If the check here, then we just take that with check, and this is harmless for white. So the move played queen b6 is ready to recharge the rook on e8. So d takes, rook takes. So a nice rook sack. Queen e3. What about in this position? What's going on? What does black play now? Okay, bishop takes g5. The queen is protected by the pawn on a7. If the queen now moves off here, then e takes is actually a mate in 5 for the white king, like this. Check, check, and take king d2, then queen c3. So we see Kramnik taking on b6. But now, instead of the automatic recapture here, we have bishop takes h4 check. And it looks as though the queen's being permitted to come back to f2. If queen f2, black has e takes f3 check. And then bishop takes f2. And actually, white has had it in this ending here. This is horrible. fg, rook takes. There's ample compensation for being exchanged out. And all these pawns are mother of pawns. In the game, queen f2 wasn't played. We see also, let's have a quick look at knight f2, e takes, king d2. Here there's bishop g5 check, and then a takes, and this is favourable for black. There's these endgames, the exchange down, but with loads of pawns that are emerging in these variations. So in the game, initial game continuation, king d2 was played after a takes. Again, we get a continuation where the exchange down for black, but for 2 pawns. And the game continued like this. Shirov has a fine looking position with his bishop pair. He doesn't mind even the rook exchange, or even this simplification. He's got a 3-2 pawn majority here. 3-0 now. So these pawns are actually pretty unstoppable over here. Starts advancing them. Check, check. It's technically winning for black. After b5, actually, with that move, Kramnik resigned at move 48. For example, king d5. The bishop's holding b7 here. Sorry, king d4. Black is threatening just to herd his pawns. So a5 we just take. We herd the pawns here. And also this pawn's pretty dangerous as well. It's just overloading the rook. But this is a wonderfully dramatic position. And actually, I think on YouTube, Shirov himself talks about this particular game. And where it was at the time this trendy variation with f3 against the Grunfeld, which kind of got into a King's Indian sort of position, Simish. So Shirov thought he might be in a bit of bother against one of the leading exponents against the King's Indian defence. But he created huge dynamism here in this continuation with e4. It looks deceptively simple, as though many club players might use e4 here. It's the follow-up, which is amazing, after this forcing move and d7. The key move here, just sacrificing the whole rook, queen b6. True fire on board there. Beautiful. Now let's go to France. White play here. White castled, and can you see what black played in this position? The prelude to a nice sacrifice. Okay, bishop d4, I'll get you a bit nearer. King h1. So black to play in this position is the finishing move of the game. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, please excuse the puzzle-like quality. I don't mean to show very clear-cut sacrifices, but this is a fairly clear-cut finish using forcing moves. So black to play here. Alright, now if you had played like queen takes a8, then white is actually doing okay after b takes c3. White's got the advantage. Say the bishop moved back, then queen e2, and the opportunity's passed to do something much more magical than take on a8. No, knight e4. This is a very, very naughty, mischievous knight offering up the queen. What's going on here? The thing is, if queen takes a5, there's a mate in 2. Can you spot it? Pause the video. I hope you can spot it. Knight g3 check is a forced mate in 2, like this. So the queen can't be taken. We see queen d1. I mean, as an alternative of queen d1, which eyes h5. But even so, knight g3 check. We force this queen takes h5, and black will be trivially winning here. This knight's actually stranded. For a start, we're going to munch the knight. So a nice little finish there from France, a bit less heavy than the others, but some cuteness factor, I think, there. Now let's go on to a mighty opponent for our last example, Vasily Ivanchuk against Shirov. And this came, I think, from a Grunfeld, and Shirov was just trying to break open the centre, but now Ivanchuk tries to keep the centre closed. Can foreign board be created here? Well, Shirov starts with taking on d4, and after bishop takes d4, can you guess what black played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, technically it does give black an advantage. Okay, like with some others we've seen, Shirov really loves creating pins, the climate for pins, deep in calculations of these pins that emerge. And here, knight e4 tries to create a humongous pin on the d file. So if f takes, which wasn't played, d takes, this is a really annoying pin with 3 pieces on it and only 1 protecting. That would be giving an advantage to black. For example, knight takes, we just take here. Takes. Actually, we're doing quite well here with black. Even though it's equal on pawns, it's better for blacks slightly. But no, actually, Vasily Ivanchuk played queen e3, and now we see another great move in the position. You know, the f pawn looked as though it was protecting e4, and that was a bit of a letdown. And this battery looks as though it's protecting this pawn. Is that let down too? Yes. Knight takes c5. Appearances are deceiving. If bishop takes c5, then d4 is actually good for black. Much better than what we've previously seen in variations. Here just rook takes c5 is strong. And d3 would be strong here. For example, knight takes, d takes e2 is strong. It's crushing, totally crushing. So d4, this is really bad news for white, because this rook takes c5 coming up. So knight takes c5, that was kind of ignored with rook cd1, so allowing Shirov to be a pawn up. Bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and now queen c6. What does queen c6 do? Well, it means that c3 might be vulnerable because of this battery down the c file. Knight e6 is on the cards. We see knight getting out of the way. Knight e6, rook d2. This pawn is the extra pawn that black has, and it's pushed with d4 immediately, setting up another huge, humongous pin, even more painful than earlier. If it's ignored, if the pawn isn't ignored, then d3, this pawn is just a troublemaker. Queen a6 is strong here, with the idea of knight d4. That's just a massive pawn. So actually, after d4, knight takes d4, and we get a humongous pin, queen b6. After rook fd1, Shirov is prepared to put more pressure on this pin, on the e3 queen, with rook d5. So even though material is equal and it's an otherwise symmetrical pawn structure, just this f3 and this diagonal is enough for this to be a totally lost position for white. What does white actually do here? If knight f5, for example, white actually resigned. If knight f5, then actually we can just take that knight off, like that. If knight c2, then we can actually just take on d2 here. So if queen takes, we've got the check. If rook takes, then in this position we have rook takes c2, and if queen takes, we have the check, and then we're going to be a piece up. So it's a disaster all round, this pin scenario. There's no way of relieving the pin. Say white tries to get his king out of the way, then we just build up on the pin. Now if knight f5 here, actually we can just take the queen off now, and then take on d2, winning a whole rook. So this really doesn't help king h1. After this is hopeless. It's amazing how Shirov makes use of pins in his combinations and his sacrifices. So he introduced one with this, and then later there was a more magnificent one when he volunteers giving back the pawn he had gained for an even worse pin. Pin and win, as we say. I hope you enjoyed this little mini tour of some of Shirov's greatest sacrifices and combinations. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.